Let's go to Athens, Blayne, the Georgia Bulldogs. Carson Beck is back, but they begin life after Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, two of the most familiar faces and two
exciting
superstars. Exciting whites, indeed, is a great way to put it. Who becomes the alpha dog, right? Talent and weapons galore. Who steps up to become the guy? Of course, you got Oscar Delp back in the fold. Georgia just picked up, by the way, content loading. Georgia just picked up a huge commitment from a Stanford transfer tight end. I'll let you talk about that. And where does the attention turn now? Again, Carson Beck's the leader, but where are most Dog fans looking when it comes to, okay, who's going to be that next guy? Because, like, there's no replacing a guy like Brock Bowers. Is there? Or is there another guy waiting in the wings that you think could pick up the mantle and be sort of that dude?
Well, listen, what Georgia has done at the tight end position is simply, under Todd Hartley, build the best tight end room in America. And you mentioned it before. Now they've added in a transfer in Benjamin Urasek from Stanford that you go and turn on his film, because nobody was watching Stanford. You're lying if you're telling me you were watching Stanford. I go and watch and turn on his film and see this dude climbing the ladder way up there above the rim, so to speak, and go and making one-handed catches and getting reverses and getting jet sweeps a la Brock Bowers. So that's not fair, okay, that you add that to what they already had in Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky and, Pierce Sperlin, all these guys that they have. So that the tight end room's its own thing. People seem to forget that Georgia last year in the transfer portal went out and got number one receivers from two SEC football teams, okay? I mean, they got Thomas and they got Dominic Lovett, who were guys that had to kind of stay in that pecking order and kind of bide their time behind McConkey, behind Bowers, because like Kirby Smart said, you're going to take somebody off Bowers off the field, or you're going to target somebody else instead of him? No, but now Thomas and Lovett have the opportunity to step up and be kind of 1A, 1B in terms of weapons on the outside for Carson Beck here. And, exciting guys like Anthony Evans, who really burst onto the scene with that punt return as a true freshman against Alabama in the SEC championship game. He's going to have an opportunity. By the way, Arian Smith is still there. If he can catch the football, nobody can catch him. Okay, nobody can catch him. So they've got a plethora of weapons. But the biggest piece for Georgia, by far and away, is Trevor Etienne. There has not been a running back like Trevor Etienne at Georgia since DeAndre Swift. There hasn't been. And he may even end up being he may be a better home run hitter than Swift was. I'm just telling you, he's that kind of player. And you putting him behind a Georgia team that is returning four guys with significant starting experience on the offensive line. Woo, buddy. I mean, Carson Beck is out there just salivating right now at the thought of what is going to go on, and it ought to look really good in year two. Carson Beck and Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator in 2024.
Blayne, you mentioned that on the offensive side, what they return on the offensive line. Georgia 47th in college football per Bill Connolly of ESPN. 65% of their production returning, but get this, 76% on the offensive side. You mentioned Dominic Lovett. You mentioned Rob Thomas. I thought last year Georgia had the best wide receiver room in the SEC. Is it crazy to say this Georgia offense this year is more talented and overall better, even without Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers? Is that fair?
Well, I mean, in terms of the sum of the parts, I would think maybe so. I mean, but listen, Brock Bowers is just he may be the greatest tight end to ever play college football. So when it comes down to it, that's tough to totally go out and say. But listen to these names: Rah Thomas, Dominic Lovett. We've already talked about. Dylan Bell is a just dude that he gets overlooked at times. They bring in 6'5", 210-pound receiver Colby Young from Miami. They also bring in London Humphreys, Anthony Evans that I talked about. Goodness gracious. I mean, they've got a bunch of guys. Arian Smith is still there. So they've got a ton of guys, and that's without mentioning any of those tight ends that we already talked about. It is a embarrassment of riches. I don't know how you want to grade them based off the other deals, but the thing is, people want to think, oh, well, Brock Bowers is gone. Georgia doesn't have weapons. Keep fooling yourself, okay? Because Georgia is absolutely just loaded for bear when it comes to the passing attack in 2024.
And to your point, though, Blayne, I think the big question for Georgia will not be, are there enough talented pieces to replace what you lost production-wise? Sure. But who's going to be that guy when it's, say, late in a ball game like in Auburn last year? And I remember watching that game, and Brock Bowers went Superman mode and just made play after play after play. He always seemed to make that big play. It's like, who's that guy? Because it's one thing to make the play. It's another thing to make the play in crunch time when your team needs it most. Also, Blayne, I'm excited. I'm sure this will make you giddy, but I'm excited to see a pissed off Kirby Smart personally because, Kirby's always got a chip on his shoulder. I mean, Kirby's a guy that I don't care who you're a fan of. Those pregame, halftime, postgame speeches will make you want to run through a brick wall. But after not appearing in the national title game, I got to think there's a little bit more. I'm sure ESPN's going to be at G-Day or whatever, but I'm just excited all throughout 2024 to kind of follow and hear from Kirby Smart. And, because I got to think there's a little bit extra going into this one.
Yeah, I don't know if College Game Day is going to be bringing Kirby on the set anytime soon, but when it comes down to it, I think Kirby always, he has something. It's hard to convince a team that's won back-to-back national championships that, hey, you got to remain hungry and all this kind of stuff, eat off the floor, all this kind of stuff that they talk about. But now you can say, hey, not only did that one time where you didn't really finish the job, didn't execute as well as you could, it didn't just, it derailed your chance, but it did it by the media thought it was so significant. You went from being the only number 1 seed ever to go down to a 6 seed and get dropped out and things like that. That's not Kirby Smart and company always just want to execute no matter what. But yeah, there's always going to be a sense of, hey, they slighted us a little bit, or they overlooked us, or we didn't do all that we could. Defensively, man, they weren't necessarily up to their standard that they had been under Kirby last year. Had some youth at linebackers. We'll see what C.J. Allen and Redland Wilson do this year behind Ismail Munden there, and then big talented guys coming back up front, whether it's Nazir Stackhouse or Warren Brinson. How do they become that kind of dominant defensive line duo that Georgia's had in years past? So a lot of things still to see, but it's going to be something that Kirby's going to enjoy kind of molding and going through this year.
Yeah, Blayne, I'm excited. You mentioned the guys up front, Stackhouse, Brinson. I'm excited to hear about the trenches specifically for Georgia this spring, because as good as Georgia was last year, it felt strange watching a Georgia team that, I remember you and I talking early last season, a Georgia team that struggled to run the football, struggled to get pressure on the quarterback. The pressure rate was one of the lowest. And I know these things improved as the season went, and Georgia was a team that peaked very late. But, you look at the 2024 schedule and just look at the SEC schedule, and I'm sure they'd like to get off to a much faster, much better start. And getting back to Georgia football, which is dominating in the trenches from the start for all 4 quarters, there's no lack of talent, but I'll be really curious to watch in the spring game, but also hear from Kirby himself, hear from Glenn Schumann, hear from Mike Bobo, just how things are going in the trenches, because that's been Georgia's bread and butter. That's why they're one of the best programs in college football.
Yeah, and having a healthy Tyron Ingram Dawkins is going to be huge. Having the guys like Jordan Hall with a year under his belt, Jamal Jarrett with a year to have worked on his body. This is a guy who stood beside Jordan Davis and made Jordan Davis look somewhat, he's a bigger than Jordan Davis, okay, when he came on his recruiting visit in high school, okay? So when it comes down to it, there is no shortage of bodies. Christian Miller, all these guys on defense, I think they will be more experienced. I think they'll be more hungry, and I think they'll be better fundamentally on the defensive side of the football. Offensive-wise, man, there's really too many guys for spots at this point in time right now. Micah Morris, Dylan Fairchild, who plays, got Jared Wilson's going to take over at center. And Ernest Green played the whole year really as a freshman because he was hurt his first year that he had to redshirt there at Georgia at left tackle. Big Truss, Xavier Truss is going to move out to right tackle probably. He's been around for like 100 years at Georgia, so he's drawing Social Security and NIL at the same time. But when it comes down to it, they ought to have plenty of experience, and they ought to be able to, just be better in the trenches this year for sure.
Blayne, you mentioned Trevor Etienne, the best Georgia running back since DeAndre Swift. That's the guy I'm most excited to hear about this spring. Just hearing updates on him, watching him in the spring game. I know with starters he may be limited, but I think he's going to be a star in Athens. I think he's going to get Georgia back to somewhat of that ground and pound. I know with Carson Beck and Mike Bobo, they're going to be airing the football out. But again, like you mentioned, at the end of the day, 3rd and 1, 4th and short, you got to run the football. Trevor Etienne's going to be that dude in Athens. Who's the dog you're most excited to hear updates on and keep up with throughout spring ball?
Just want to see Michael Williams have a healthy spring. He's been hurt every spring. He's had nagging injuries, stuff like that. Want to see him be healthy, and he's also maybe making that move out to jack it and be more of a stand-up linebacker than he is a defensive end. With his hand in the dirt a lot of times. I think you talked about the lack of pass rush at times. He's the type of guy that can be there. And those other guys that are on the edge that are as exciting as well, that were young, weren't quite ready last year, whether it's Damon Wilson, Samuel Mpemba, Gabe Harris, all these edge guys. I think that's where I'm most excited to hear about for Georgia this spring.